evening, everyone. Welcome to another episode of System Link, our live gaming podcast featuring, as always, my co-host Mike Hazelton from the Xbox Guide. Mike, how are we doing?
Yeah, good, thanks. It's been a while since a System Link, so
Yeah,
looking
it's
forward
been a
to it.
minute. We've had some child germs we've both been wrestling with in our
Yeah.
respective families, so that's been fun. Just in case anyone is not aware, we're going to be continuing our Burly Bird lives together on a Saturday at about 9:15. Between 9 and 9:15, depending on again how the family has been shut down for the evening, but that will be very much continuing again from this weekend. So please consider checking that out. We tend to keep the game under wraps, not because of some secretive thing, but because we sometimes don't know what we're going to play until the day. So we always end up discussing that. Good evening, Big Manny. Good to see you, bud. Thank you for tuning in. We obviously, having not done System Link last week, we have a few headlines we wanted to make sure we covered from last week, including the rumours of Nintendo Switch 2 coming out by March next year, which would follow a similar cadence if it was like a sort of start of 2025 announcement leading perhaps to a March release for the console, getting it in before the end of the fiscal year. So we're going to be covering those rumors and also discussing how Casey Hudson, former lead at BioWare, his new studio and his new sci-fi RPG, has now been cancelled and the studio shut down. So it's a few bits from last week we want to cover. We're also going to be talking about the big news from today, our big headline story. Our deep dive is going to be on xDefiant and how that game has had a rather tumultuous development and now has now been confirmed to be shutting down with some significant job impacts and losses there. So we'll be talking about that as our main event later tonight. We're going to dive into our headlines. We're going to kick things off. Just a story that came out from Digital Foundry last week, which was the mention that Sony are in fact developing a native handheld as a follow-up to not the PS Portal, which is a streaming device, but I suppose essentially a sequel to the PS Vita and PSP. It would be their third sort of bespoke handheld hardware, sorry, and quite a intriguing move. I think it seemed to be when we went into this gen before the Steam Deck was a thing that both Xbox, PlayStation have moved away from that. Switch obviously now moving to a hybrid setup and minimizing the implications for development. We've seen that obviously now they've been able to pool their development resources into developing for one platform. Historically, Sony have a really good track record of supporting their consoles out the gate. I think PSP actually then had a much longer tail of support than the Vita did. The Vita had a great opening between Uncharted, Killzone Mercenary, and Assassin's Creed game that was exclusive, and then that support did rapidly drop off. So I'm kind of hitting pause on any sort of significant enthusiasm for that, for what that might be. I'm not ready to attach myself to it yet. It's very difficult, I think, when it's still technically rumored and it's not a physical thing to attach my excitement to. The PS Portal obviously has I think it's fair to say has now done better than perhaps they had anticipated. Certainly now that it supports out of the home streaming as well, streaming directly to it. Do you think that this rumor, obviously it was reported by Digital Foundry, do you think this has any sort of credibility? Do we think it's likely that Sony are developing this?
Yeah, I don't think Digital Foundry are often wrong about stuff like this, except for the GameCube Virtual Console.
Now, was that
But
Digital Foundry or was that Eurogamer?
I don't know. Let's
Because
not
they like
together.
to go to great pains always to remind us that they are
I
separate
know,
entities,
I
which is
know.
really funny. Gives them some an
Um,
out if they get it wrong.
yeah, I think it will be similar to the Wii situation where they'll feel like they can't afford to not be involved with this
Hmm.
push for handheld. Um, I could see them differentiating themselves by having a really high-end handheld compared to Xbox and Nintendo, because traditionally the PlayStation handhelds have been quite expensive.
Hmm.
And given the price of the PS5 Pro, I think they could, put it that sort of price or higher, and PlayStation fans would
Yeah, that's
be
interesting.
willing to pay that.
Because they've shown obviously the Pro maybe being that first dip of toe into that sort of console market and shooting for that higher price point. We've seen as well the Steam Deck with its various iterations that there is a high-end market for that too, the one with the OLED screen and obviously the HDR support. There is obviously a market for a much higher priced handheld, and again, we're in the PC space now, so it's definitely sort of leaning towards enthusiast gamers and that are very much in that sort of hardcore space. But they've proven, like you say, they've proven a willingness to experiment with their pricing and to also iterate on their current console platforms. I don't see any reason why we don't see a more, like you said, a kind of high-end approach with them, and then Xbox takes the Series S as a handheld approach, perhaps,
Yeah,
as their next gen.
I think the only caveat would be if they all feel like they have to have a native handheld kind of as a launch SKU for their next console, because I feel like that's what Xbox will do. That's obviously what Nintendo are doing. And if you don't have like this dockable handheld as essentially like a cheaper version of your main sort of high end home console, it's a kind of a different approach. So it's maybe a slightly risky one. Obviously, it would be something you can attach to your TV, but whether it has the same sort of form factor, like you're docking it, and that's kind of the main function of it. It'll be interesting to
see how that evolves afterwards. Junior Newbie got in chat saying, I'm waiting for them to connect the handheld to the VR system with specific games. Yeah, I think there's an almost Wii U style second screen experience that could be very interesting there if they can somehow tie that together. I know that PSVR 1 had the option to have the VR viewpoint displayed on the screen while someone was in game, so that created multiplayer opportunities where someone could use a traditional controller. That could be a very interesting way of using the handheld too, with its screen built in. There could be a second screen experience or a multiplayer asymmetric type thing. Sony have shown a willingness to experiment with that stuff, even if it is just from their first party. So I think there could maybe be some interesting tie-ins as a way to increase the value proposition of PSVR 2, which for all intents and purposes has been received quite modestly. It hasn't really set tills alight like the first one did. So there's scope certainly for them to integrate with their current setup, and it might be a sort of third pillar for them, maybe alongside. You've got VR, home console, obviously with the PS5 Pro option, and then a handheld, and they all kind of have synergy and speak together. That could be a really interesting idea. Judy Newby following up in chat now saying sort of like what Xbox had with the Kinect, but use the docking station as like a camera VR. Yeah, there's all kinds of scope for that. That's a very Nintendo way of utilizing their hardware, I think. So I actually think maybe just now talking about it now and seeing your response in chat, that might be something Nintendo end up dipping a toe into. But I haven't seen out. I mean, Labo doesn't count; it was cardboard. But I haven't seen a huge amount of interest from Nintendo to go into that idea of sort of wearable. The Virtual Boy again doesn't count either. But yeah,
I could really see them doing AR more.
Yes,
I think that would be that. It's like that's the sort of thing that hasn't really taken off. Obviously, Pokemon Go kind of uses it to an extent, but literally as soon as Nintendo go for that, everyone will start picking it up, because I think it is something that will catch on once the masses get hold of it.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I could see them maybe not for the Switch 2, because all they need to do is make another Switch and it'll print money, but for the next console.
Well, let's turn this out to chat then, because I think certainly after the PS Vita again was sort of quite softly received in terms of sales, and there did seem to be a shift away from the handheld market, certainly with Nintendo going with the Switch as a dedicated sort of a hybrid console that leveraged both playstyles. Is there, just a question to chat right now, just while we move on to our next headline, just to kind of circle back to it, is there an interest for you in having a handheld option? Is that something that you are excited about, that these platform holders, it seems to be, Switch aren't moving away from their hybrid thing. They're going to keep a handheld option, certainly for Switch 2. PlayStation now obviously rumoured to be doing this. Xbox have openly said they're developing a handheld, but it's obviously a ways out. Steam have already come out with their version. This is becoming a really big part of the market again, where it seemed like when the Wii U's kind of weird tablet home console thing didn't really land, and the Vita didn't really take off, it seemed to be, before the Switch, before Steam Deck, that this was something that audiences have moved away from, but there's a real resurgence in it. Is it something that's interesting to you, chat? Is it something that you actually want these platforms to be focusing their effort on? Do you see it as a secondary experience, or is it actually the thing that's going to be the thing that gets you into quote-unquote next gen? I know following Greg Miller on Twitter, where he talks about his son and looking after a young boy, that playing on the sofa, having the PlayStation Portal completely changed his whole gaming experience. It became so much more practical for him to keep up with his single-player games because of that handheld option. So yeah, just curious what you think on that.
I'd just also like to ask, mainly a question for you. Do a significant number of people play these out of home? Because I only occasionally travel to London, but it's a significant amount of traveling. I've literally never seen anyone playing Switch on the train or anything. I've never seen anyone playing the PC handhelds. I know you get like Phil Spencer's apparently always playing it on the plane and stuff, but I've anecdotally heard that like some of the the metrics around it are that people are still just using it in the home, like they're using it
Mm.
in a room upstairs while their family is watching TV, or they're on the sofa playing it while someone's using the main TV. I'm just curious as to if it is a bit more of a transition from, like you said, maybe the original handheld concept it kind of isn't really there anymore, and it's more of a multifunctional device with the main purpose being it's like a second screen at home.
Yeah,
And then
it's sort of interesting to look at it from a usage case perspective, like what is actually this thing being utilized and how is it being utilized, as opposed to what perhaps the advertising would suggest its intended purposes, right? So I mean, I know for myself, I played the Switch at home, and there's only been very rare instances, and I've done the Xbox cloud streaming at home as well. There's only been rare instances really where I've used it out, and often it's to do with longer haul travel. If it's like a
exactly,
commute
you
or
have to get
local,
set up, and it's not a
yeah,
big deal, is it, to get set up? But like in your mindset, I feel like you need a good couple of hours to make it
yeah.
worthwhile, like getting it out and starting a game. And
Totally. I think if I was like just traveling into London, I'd never do it because I live only about half an hour
yeah,
away. If I've got like a 2 hour train journey, I'm going up north somewhere, absolutely it becomes an obvious, easy choice. Maybe not the Xbox streaming because of the, relying on 4G. But if you've got decent Wi-Fi access on a train and you can make that work without it being, throttled in any way or awkward to connect to, then I think, yeah, those instances are where, or certainly if you've gone away somewhere and if you've got a lot of downtime, I think those
yeah.
instances certainly. But just everyday usage, I don't think so. And again,
Like,
it's all very anecdotal, isn't it? We haven't got any data to back that up, but that just seems to be what my impression is of that for sure.
yeah, and I think, but the problem is when you have them as essentially home consoles that you can take out and about, the games aren't designed with portability in mind.
Right.
So when I used to play the PSP, I used to play Pro Evo on the train because it was like 10 minutes. Or
Mm-hmm.
like on the way to Watford or something, I'd play Pro Evo in the 10 minutes it took. I could have one match in the time it took me to get there. Anything else, like if you're in the middle of playing Stalker or something, you're not gonna, like, I don't even know if that's cloud enabled. I guess it is. You're not gonna take that out on
Mm.
the train and play it. Oh, it's just not the sort of game to
Well,
do
no,
it.
and I
And
remember playing like my Vita I had all the time on my train journeys into London, and I would always struggle with the games that were just like portable ports of games.
yeah,
If it was a
exactly.
bespoke thing, like I always remember Tearaway, Media Molecules Tearaway on Vita, built from the ground up for that thing. It was an exclusive at the time. Killzone Mercenary, another one. The HUD was the touchscreen HUD.
PSP was great for
Yeah,
handheld, like
for like
portable
bespoke
games.
handheld games
Yeah,
like that. That's where I think, say, the Switch doesn't tick that box because you're having to build those titles to scale up to, living rooms and big screens. So it's
and
yeah,
when the problem with the Switch is when they make the handheld specific games, they're still charging 50 quid for them, and they would
yeah,
never have been that price because you like some of them are like mini game collections, or
hmm
they're stuff that on the Vita and on the PSP were, they're almost like browser or mobile games. They're barely console games, and they're getting charged silly money
hmm
for.
No, it's a fair point. Junior Newbie God weighing in on chat now. If handhelds are done well, then I'd say they can compete with home consoles as a mobile variant. So it's more convenient for travel. Just depends on what you want out of it for me personally. Yeah, I think that's actually it. I think if you can justify it from the perspective of you're going to use it outside the house because your commutes are longer, then it's an easier sell. I also think there is totally a market, and the PS Portal's proven this. I really didn't think that thing would find any audience at all, but it has, and the where I was wrong with that is the in-home usage is actually not the streaming side of it, is just literally being able to play your home console at home away from the TV that it's plugged into.
Yeah, I'm to be honest a bit surprised Microsoft haven't copied that idea of having a non-native handheld for the home that they could just quickly produce and get out there, because they've had they should have done it first. They should have done it like 2 or 3 years ago when they had the cloud infrastructure in place to make it work already. And we've had remote play on both platforms, but Xbox really dialed into that on Xbox One without having this sort of cool hardware behind it.
Yeah, absolutely. Judy Newbie got in chat as well saying, like, as bad as it sounds, I'd rather take my 3DS out than my Switch just because of cost effectiveness and value alongside travel times. Yeah, that's fair. Also, I'd argue portability. The Switch is small, but you're using the Joy-Cons, and if you take them off, you're going to kickstand it on a TV table. A
kickstand.
DS or a Vita is completely self-contained and much smaller. It is a bigger ask to put that in your bag and have that and take that out and use it. So yeah, interesting. Lots to consider there. One of our other headlines we wanted to cover this week was, we mentioned it in our intro, Casey Hudson's studio has, unfortunately, its funding has dried up, and they are not only cancelling their new IP that they've been working on, this sci-fi RPG that he's been cooking up, but the studio itself is closing as well. Just yet another bit of bad news in this space, both either from indie or big publishers. Wasn't really a huge amount known about this title. It wasn't like it was particularly followed in that sense. They hadn't had a sort of major reveal, but the concept of it sounded great pedigree as well, and it was clearly made by a passionate team that unfortunately aren't going to get a chance to finish that project. It's a real shame, I think, and given our main sort of deep dive tonight on xDefiant, a unfortunate recurring theme.
Yeah, I always find it strange in these situations that, especially because they spent a couple of years on it, did you say? At least a couple of years, that no one's interested in picking it up.
Right.
Or even if it's like on quite unfavorable terms, just to keep the teams employed. Like you could fund the development, and then the publisher gets like all of the returns. You're just paying the salaries of the staff or something. Like, unless it was really they hadn't made any progress with the game. I also find it interesting that you don't suddenly get a big kind of dump of assets when this happens. Like, if it was me and I'd say we've worked for 2 years on this game and sadly we're having to shut down, this is what it looked like. The fact that they haven't done that suggests there's something
always perhaps earlier than we
still
thought.
there. That either it's too early, but you still I would have thought you've got concept art or something you can show people.
Yeah, 2 years of dev on that. Like same with Deviation Games, that partnership with Sony. They essentially funded their entire development. They never made a game before that. They funded it, and then it got plug pulled. We then saw nothing from them. So it's
I mean, part of me hopes there is a game there, and they're just kind of holding on to it. Some Casey Hudson is holding on to it, hoping it, he gets picked up by someone and he can rehire some of the people or something. It's always a bit strange, to me, that it's just not. Otherwise, I think you would share everything that you have on it. Why not? Well, help people get jobs.
Yeah, especially from a portfolio perspective, it's a way for people to get hired. But also, we have seen publishers swoop in, craft them with Tango Gameworks. It's not unheard of. So maybe they're kind of keeping their cards closer to the chest for that exact reason, because they think there might be an opportunity to have a second wind on that. So yeah, regardless of how that all pans out, I do hope that team lands on their feet, because again, there was a great pedigree in that studio, and they deserve to have their art find an audience. So fingers crossed to all of them that they manage to find either new places or that in fact that game gets rescued. We have also recently Insider Gaming's rumor about Nintendo Switch 2 dropping in March. I think given the Switch's cadence and its following success, I think that is likely. We have seen sort of some smaller new first-party titles or remakes become a bit of a focus of Nintendo's releases in the last 12 months, which suggests to me they're kind of shifting their primary dev resources over to the next gen for them and their next console. Do we think this timing is likely? Do we think this rumor has any validity?
I think Switch was October to March, wasn't it? I think it was announced in October. It feels so tight to me, considering they're not going to presumably announce it now before Christmas. So it'll be announced in like January for release in March. It's for it not to have leaked significantly. I know Nintendo are good at that stuff, but I don't know. It's such a quick turnaround. I would feel more comfortable with like the traditional May kind of release that they like to do. It wouldn't surprise me if they tried to match the October to March kind of timeline, and maybe May or June, but don't know. Inside a game, they're usually pretty good, but
that's a good point. The October reveal was of the branding and of the console, and then I remember the January event for them was like some of the games. We saw Mario Odyssey for the first time, Splatoon being confirmed, and the new Splatoon being confirmed at that event, and ARMS as well. That's where that was revealed. So it's a tricky one. That I think they don't want to shoot themselves in the foot without by having something rushed out, or maybe is this a classic Nintendo way of inflating the success by restricting the pre-order numbers, because of course they're not going to be able to produce that much silicon and enough hardware to
Well,
satisfy demand. It's going to be one of those. We couldn't possibly meet the demand because the pre-orders were just, they blew up.
yeah, so that's something I just thought about as well. Is that I know Switch sales have gone through the floor, but they'll still sell a not insignificant number of them at Christmas. So they're not going to want to announce the next Switch before Christmas, even in like October probably, because all the parents and grandparents who don't really understand what's going on with the games industry will just would just buy it unless they see there's like you go into Game, if that still exists, and there's like Switch 2 being advertised.
Yeah, exactly. They'll be like, what the hell?
So they could be holding it. Bearing in mind the branding is not going to be a big thing because it's probably just going to be called Switch 2 or Super Switch or whatever, something lame. So they wouldn't necessarily need a branding event. They could potentially just do what they did and have the game shown in January if it's going to be more iterative. But I think that will take something away from the fanfare of it if it's just suddenly like Switch 2 is coming in March. Here's the games. They're all playable on Switch as well because they will be. Don't know. I prefer a bit of a longer lead up.
Bit of a turnaround. That would be a very sort of GameCube N64 era release because both came out in May, I think. I know GameCube certainly did. N64, I might be wrong on that, but they dropped the GameCube in May, early May, and that's a definitely precedent for that. This is, of course, back before the time of us being able to enjoy it as a YouTube. We find out about new consoles when they got the magazine came out in W.H. Smith's, showing my age. So a couple of Xbox-related things. We've seen now Flight Sim and Stalker be mercifully given some significant patches because of there was a fairly disastrous launch, probably more so for Flight Sim than Stalker. Stalker, I think, has had sort of mixed reviews, but was playable despite being a bit glitchy, whereas Flight Sim for its first few days was non-existent. Another sort of real bungling of a major first-party franchise there from Microsoft. They really just should have done better. But we see now some significant patch updates to both games. Stalker 2 has had 2 large patch updates that have addressed a significant quantity of bugs, and Flight Sim now actually playable. Has sentiment shifted, do we think?
I think similar to Cyberpunk. I don't think it's quite as bad as Cyberpunk because there wasn't like this crazy looking target that they were trying to get to with Stalker. People, I think, knew it was going to be a little bit ropey. But I think a lot of people are also holding off playing it. It's doing quite well. I think both games are in the top 10 most played, which is decent for new, especially Flight Sim. It's a bit surprising. And I think a lot of the stability issues have been fixed. But the main thing for Stalker, I think, is there's this like environmental AI where like other stalkers do stuff while you're like traversing the world, quite standard. But it's maybe a bit more dynamic and a bit more interesting than in some games, and that's not working very well at all. They had to dial it right back to get the game to be playable on multiple Series S and lower end PCs, I think. So for me, I wouldn't jump in until I'm confident that's where they intended it to be when they designed the game. Because for me, I would like it to feel like it's kind of a living world and there's
yeah,
for
sure,
stuff going on.
and especially as these games
I would wait for that.
It becomes so ambitious that you kind of want. I'm finding myself waiting for patches a lot more. I'm waiting post-launch for these things because they just either need longer to cook, or when they do come out, being in a live environment exposes those issues perhaps more than they could have ever done in testing. Just circling back onto the console releases, Junior Newbie God weighing in saying older generations just don't really get the idea of better graphics, less delay, etc. They value cost compared to effectiveness, as they don't really see the difference in generational releases of consoles. So releasing after Christmas gives a chance for their older generation consoles, as it would then be a way for them to get rid of old stock, which is it makes sense, absolutely. And I think Nintendo are very shrewd with things like that with their releases, and will likely try and time it for that.
It's interesting though, just on that, they don't do. I'm always going on about Nintendo and price, but this is the last Christmas they're selling the Switch.
Yeah,
probably ever, because the Switch 2 is just going to be an iterative thing, unless they do some sort of like really light Switch that's super cheap, and they're still not cutting the price significantly. And the game's not cutting the price of the games, and it's just this is your last chance to sell it. But they've got this thing, and I've worked at companies that are like this, where the brand is premium and they won't devalue the brand by discounting anything, and that's definitely what Nintendo are doing. They just literally they would rather throw Switches in the bin than discount.
Yeah, they just hold the line, and that's it. That traditional model has seen huge success for them, right? So, and when it has, and when it hasn't, GameCube, Wii U, they have been reactive and they have adjusted their pricing, and we've seen a number of those titles now be ported forward to other consoles. So they you know, it's not a spotless track record by any means, but certainly when they have been firing on all cylinders, we've seen them hold the line on their pricing and not budge. And we see that reflected in the eShop pricing now. Tears of the Kingdom 60, is that right? Did we confirm that, didn't we? I think Tears of the Kingdom still holding at 60.
Yeah.
Breath of the Wild still at 50 in many instances.
Oh, no, I was looking at Christmas presents and like Switch Sports and the Kirby co-op game, I forget what it's called. They're like still 38, 40 quid new. And like Switch Sports especially, it's just like 4 mini games, isn't it? It's just ridiculous.
Yeah. But now with added basketball.
Computer Exchange selling it for £39.
Yeah. I know. So, they pay you to buy it. Which is insane.
But just on Flight Sim, so I was talking about Stalker. Flight Sim, I think is basically okay now, but the first time I didn't get any issues with Flight Sim at all. When I played it, which was maybe a week after it came out, you would have assets that didn't load in, and you get like a big red X or something in the game world where there's supposed to be a plane or a character or something. So there's definitely some issues around that. I don't know if those have been resolved because I haven't been back to it, but it's playable and you can enjoy the kind of remarkable world that's streamed in from the cloud and stuff. So I think that's getting there.
Nice. Okay, that's good to hear, because a title with that kind of history to it and a real meaningful legacy, something you want to see actually be delivered in a way that fans will be happy with, and that clearly has not been the case.
Do you think that as annoying as these, we haven't got them on the agenda, but as annoying as these pre-release windows are for Game Pass games, we didn't have it for Stalker, I don't think, or Flight Sim. That is an upside of that, is that they get a few days of lower numbers, especially to a game like Flight Sim. If they'd have done it for Flight Sim, where they have like a quarter of the numbers that go in on the first few days, and they can scale up the service, because it was obviously a server issue. I don't like it because I don't know. Like I think you were saying on Threads, like the story for Indy is going to leak out and people are going to be talking about it early. It's going to
be Spoilerville, isn't it, when that thing drops? Which is such a shame, given that it is a single player narrative title. But you know,
yeah, I don't know why there's a better way to do it. You have like a pool of gamers that are like you have the insider thing.
Well, yeah, I think
maybe you just give it to some people ahead of time to play test it and sort
the
stuff
better
out.
way is sort of like you do sort of more open betas should become a thing. We see so many closed betas or things locked behind pre-order bonuses, but not actually just open testing regularly.
Why only for multiplayer games? Because Stalker obviously has had significant issues. Flight Sim is basically a single player game. It's had massive issues. Avowed, why not do it for Avowed? Because Avowed was probably, well, according to Phil, it was basically finished in October or whatever. They could easily let people try Avowed and give them some like balancing feedback and stuff. Just make the game
a traditional demo, which would be a great way that, as a vertical slice, it's likely to be polished, so the bug side of it will be taken care of. But it would then help address, like you said, things like balance and gameplay mechanics and controls and sensitivity and all those things that you want that feedback for, not after your game comes out, so your Steam review score says mixed. You want to get that ahead of time. So yeah, I think more explicit open betas and more demos for single player titles, I think, would be a great way of solving that. Certainly, as development costs continue to balloon and the complexity of these games continues to get more and more challenging, that'd be a great way to mitigate that. Potentially. Junior Newbie God jumping into chat. It's the same as Xbox games, though a bunch of the exclusives or main titles retain their price on their games unless they're in things like Black Friday sales, which, to be fair, both PlayStation and Xbox do some fantastic digital storefront sales on their platform. They do some great discounts on their titles. And while Nintendo have the eShop sales every now and then, the first party stuff rarely gets knocked off by more than 10-15 quid. And it's nothing meaningful, certainly if you're on a budget or it's your second platform. So yeah, there's a lot of work to be done there. And like you said, Mike, they hold the value, right? They retain the value of the brand by holding the line on that pricing. So it's unlikely we'll see that dynamically adjust in the future. Moving ahead, looking now, obviously we just mentioned it already. It's a good segue into Indiana Jones, the early access launching this week. And the big concern, obviously, like I said in my post on Threads, was just the potential for people just to spoil the hell out of that thing. I'm actually really excited for that game because I think I think they didn't show meaningful chunks of it early enough, and suddenly within about a month or two of release, they've just opened the floodgates and they've really been explicit on what that game actually looks like and how it plays. Wonkiness and all, actually, I've actually quite liked seeing some of its sort of slightly janky elements, which actually in some ways lends itself to an Indiana Jones feel. I don't know why. I do think they've captured it really well, and hats off to Troy Baker. We gave him a shout out in the last episode of System Link, but what a fantastic performance from what we've seen of as Indy. You know, doing.
It seems to be really well written and the music as well. Definitely evokes the old and the more recent Indiana Jones films. I think I was concerned it was basically going to be like a Wolfenstein game with Indiana Jones, and it's not that at all. It's more exploration and stealth and very minimal combat, which is great, and it's kind of what I was looking for. So I'm, compared to like 3 months ago, my hype levels are much higher for it, and I've got pretty high hopes. I think it will do like pretty well. Eights or nines, hopefully.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think also our conversations before about release timing of that PS5 edition, I think it should be 6 months minimum between a Game Pass.
Yeah,
like
but
it
won't have the Xbox tax because it's coming to.
No, of course not. So. Of course not. Thank you, Internet, for making sure we've removed that as a problem. Junior Newbie God, I saw the Indiana Jones trailer similar to the Love Cross series of like Far Cry. Yeah, I mean, that's the irony, of course, is that those games, Uncharted was very much inspired by Tomb Raider and Indiana Jones, and now people are saying, oh, India, they're just trying to make it like Uncharted. They've done that sort of fascinating 180 with what's in the zeitgeist and what people care about.
Yeah, I think the set pieces will be interesting because we haven't really seen those, but there's obviously in the films there's some Uncharted style set pieces in the Indiana Jones films that we haven't really seen in the trailers yet. It's all very like you're exploring, you're sneaking up on people, hitting them with frying pans and stuff. But you'd imagine there'll be some, whatever, people are shooting you and you're running for a plane or like diving off a bridge or some crazy Indiana Jones stuff
like that.
Actually,
I do hope he gets chased by a boulder. I really hope we see that iconic imagery.
They had the room filling with sand and stuff.
Yes, so and I was like, yeah, that's lovely. And there was like a whip over a gap moment as the sand was rising, which is great.
Even if he's like, I did this before.
Yeah, totally. I'm hoping for like some walls of spikes to come in as well. I think all of those sort of iconic moments I think will be really fun.
What would be good is if they you said it was a bit janky. If they had some bits that kind of nod to the way that the stunts were filmed in the old, like in Die Another Day where he's doing the
totally. So we sort of see some slightly wonky,
a bit like that, as if you're watching a film rather than a game. Would be quite fun.
I think that's something I was going to say. We haven't talked about this, but I am hoping that we see them actually have some fun with their chosen medium. The fact that this is a video game adaptation of that, and the first Indiana Jones video game in quite some time, besides the Lego spin-offs. So it's an opportunity for them to really carve a space for themselves. And there is DLC included in a season pass too. So we're getting that in the deluxe edition. So something which, by the way, if there is a decent upgrade for that I could get for like 30 quid like they did with Black Ops, I'd be open to that. I think that's a very smart way of pricing those
Would
things.
You get it now so you can play early?
No, not for the early access. I think it would be for access to that DLC. Yeah. I don't know whether that will ever be sold separately, whether they'll take the Alan Wake 2 approach, which is that you get the deluxe edition. That includes the DLC, essentially, like a season pass. I don't know whether they'll end up selling it separately or not.
Do you think that that's the Microsoft model now.
I do.
Like £30 extra deluxe edition.
Yeah, I
but
do.
the only concern with that is you're then dictating to the studio that they have to produce a piece of DLC
Or
that's
something.
significant enough, because we had with the Starfield DLC,
Yeah.
it wasn't long enough to justify the price. As if
Right.
like Microsoft has said, you've got to make some DLC that's £30 worth, and they've struggled to hit
Yeah.
that. I don't really know why they didn't just include, because there's more DLC coming. I don't know why they didn't just put them both in there, to be honest. But I'm sure if a developer was like, yeah, we don't want to make DLC for the game, they wouldn't be forced to. But I have a bit of a concern about the kind of
Like a mandate of that.
copy and paste
Yeah.
deluxe editions that we're
Well, we did
seeing
it with
some
Starfield,
of
so
these
therefore
games.
it's now mandated for all of our first-party titles that we're going to have an early access release for. Yeah, I think that's you'd be nervous about that because then it becomes a monetization approach rather than a creative one. This is a story we want to tell and add on to our game
Yeah,
versus ticking a box.
they do need ways to monetize the games further, absolutely. But I think they could try some different stuff. Make people pay £5 extra to play it 3 days early, or £10 extra. I think a lot of people would pay £10 more to play it 3 days early, without all the DLC stuff. They just be a bit cleverer, or a bit more experimental with it. Because I don't think it worked that well for Starfield. Other than I think they probably sold a lot of deluxe editions, but I don't think the DLC was well received, and the people that paid for the deluxe edition were a bit pissed because it, in the end, didn't represent great value.
Going back to chat, Junior Newbie God mentioning how he loved playing the Lego Indiana Jones games and watching the old films with Harrison Ford. Yeah, absolutely. I'm a big Indy fan. I really enjoy the films. I actually haven't seen the most recent one. I haven't seen Dial of Destiny, which I've heard is a significant improvement over.
I haven't seen any of the new ones.
Yeah, Kingdom of the Crystal Skull with the aliens in it. No thanks, George Lucas. Get the hell out of my indie. With deluxe editions and stuff, it's either an expansion or just like 3 exclusive skins in early access. Yeah, that's true. I have very little interest when deluxe editions are just like, here's this skin pack and you can play 3 days early. I think when it is the Alan Wake 2 model of here's some customization, but here is 2 expansions day and date when they drop, that has a real tangible value to me. And you referenced Starfield there. I think you're right. If they'd included those 2 major updates in that, maybe treated one of them as more of an expansion style thing and had Shattered Space in there too, that could have easily justified that cost. So conceptually, I have no problem with Microsoft monetizing Game Pass like that. They're giving away the game for free, quote unquote, as part of a sub, but make your deluxe editions worth the upgrade, and it needs to be meaningful DLC in order to, I think, to convince people to do that. Exciting though, exciting times for that title and that studio. I hope this is charting a new course forward for machine games, and it's exciting for them. I also hope that they may be, given Microsoft and Bethesda's tendency to have multi-team studios in their first-party infrastructure, that we see them split off into 2 teams, that we get either an indie or a new IP studio, and then
a game without Nazis.
Yeah, exactly. Good. Never. We'll not. We will always be punching them. And then they have Wolfenstein being revisited as well, because that series has a real loyal following, which is great. I think I only do them with main titles. Junior Newbie here in chat. I know I'm going to put time into. I typically value games as 2 hours per £1 of cost. Interesting. I don't think I've ever, valued a game sort of length to money equation. That's not it for me. It's just, I think I look at the experience I'm going to have, not the amount of time I'm in it, and then go, well, I don't particularly want to spend, say, £50 on a golf game, like, say, Mario Golf, but if it was Mario Tennis, I'm all in. So I look at it like that.
Yeah, well, it definitely comes into it. Not quite that, but the quality, and I think of how long did it take them to make that game? Are they justified in charging that price for it? So Mario Tennis, like, they didn't shit it out, but that's what I want to say. Yeah. It didn't take like a team of 300 people 5 years to make Mario Tennis,
right?
And yet they're charging similar price to a game that did take that length of time, as opposed to the how much I'll get out of it. But that probably is the more sensible way to view it. Is it a game I'm going to love? Am I going to play it for 30, 40 hours? Then it's probably justified for the price.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. Yeah, that's interesting. It's definitely something for us to get into, I think, as these games get more and more complex, especially single-player games, when you've got a lot of titles vying for your attention. and then you're factoring in free
It's
to play
it's
on top of that. It's interesting.
it's tough with stuff like the Dark Pictures anthology, where
Mm.
obviously they're very good looking games. They've all got motion capture and loads of actors in, and yet they're short. And although you can play them multiple times, I personally haven't played any of them multiple times. I think I will in the future. I'll go back to some of them in the future, but that is a bit of a different equation because you're not going to get more than like 6 or 8 hours play out of it. But it's like watching an 8 hour film, in which probably if you were working out how much you spend on the cinema, it's like the price works out about right in the end for the game.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, absolutely. So we're kind of moving in now into our sort of big headline story, big sort of deep dive, which is xDefiant shutting down. And we're looking at this now from a perspective of a team that only 2 months ago were denying similar insider gaming reports that the game was in fact getting ready to be sunsetted. At the time, there was no mention of any job losses or studio closures, but the notion of them stopping seasonal updates and the game being delisted was already floated, and it was vehemently denied. Fast forward 2 months, and we're here. xDefiant is being shut down imminently. The studios, having over 200 people across 3 different teams, are being either the teams themselves being axed or halved. Another half of those developers that worked on xDefiant are being given jobs elsewhere within Ubisoft at different studios and on different projects. This is a very interesting time for free-to-play games, and I think xDefiant had tried to unreservedly, and it was an open secret that they were shooting for the Call of Duty market. I don't think there was it's a surprise for them to have said, well, no, that is the space that we're going to wade into. We're not trying to be Fortnite. We're not trying to be Roblox or Rocket League. We are going for Call of Duty. That is the type of game we want to make. That is the type of game they thought they could perhaps put their own take on it and utilize their various franchises to bolster. And the experiment failed. It didn't work. We played xDefiant. We played it a few times, actually. I think we played the beta. We played a couple times after launch. And it suffered from it being sort of competent, I think. It was competent, but unremarkable. The closest comparison I can make is Concord, which I know is slightly different because it was premium, but perfect, mechanically fine, and that's the problem.
Ugly game.
Yeah,
Compared to Concord, which was quite a polished,
sure.
accomplished
Yeah,
looking
it
game.
did.
Like, it wasn't crazy looking, but it was yeah, it didn't look out of place. Whereas I think xDefiant looked like a last gen game.
It did, and it wasn't. It was not a last gen game, and yet it was next gen.
Why didn't
only.
they do that? Why didn't they release it on?
Yeah, I know.
On last gen.
Yeah, that would have definitely found an audience there for sure. People that were still playing Call of Duty last gen that wanted to keep them, haven't upgraded to the next console yet. They definitely found an audience there for sure.
It's unfortunately for Ubisoft, it's like decision after every single decision they've made in the last couple of years has been bad. In terms of games they've greenlit, games they've put money into, games they've cancelled even. I'm not talking about this, but Assassin's Creed sounds like it's. I think it might have been Insider Gaming again. That like people are saying it's the weakest Assassin's Creed they've played. The people that have play tested it and stuff, and I feel like it's hard to kind of divorce that from the anti-woke discussion and things.
Mm-hmm.
We just have to wait and see how it lands, I suppose. But it was always going to be risky, and when you try, if you're trying to shoot for Call of Duty with significant, like hundreds of people making the game, you basically have to have similar success to Call of Duty. Not quite, but you're going to have like hundreds of thousands of people playing the game, which is a big ask for a new IP.
Mm-hmm.
Like random people won't have heard of xDefiant. If they see it advertised on the store or whatever, they're probably not just going to jump in and try it. Got to really get the streamers playing it and enthusiastic about it. And when you compare it to something like the finals, I don't know how many people worked on the finals, but I would assume it's significantly less than worked on xDefiant, which means that, say there's 20,000 people playing the finals like multiple times per week. There's probably quite a few more than that across consoles, but I think those were the PC
PC
numbers.
numbers, yeah.
That's probably can sustain a team of,
Hmm.
not a very big a skeleton team kind of that's keeping the finals running while the main team is working on something else. Um, but it's ambitious and it's risky when you're. I'm sure when they greenlit xDefiant, Ubisoft were in a much better place than they are now. But it's they don't like cancelling, like we saw with Skull and Bones. That should have been cancelled years before it came out. It was never going to succeed.
And
How
look,
they don't see that, I don't know.
I have to know exactly, and I have to be objective here, even though it strikes me to my core. Beyond Good and Evil 2 should have been cancelled by now. That game should not still be in development. For the exact same reasons that Skull and Bones should have been.
Yeah, you have to hope not many people are working on that.
Right.
If they've got hundreds of people working on that game, it's just a travesty. As much as I want it to come out for your benefit and do well, if hundreds of people have been working on the game for the length of time it's been since it got announced, it's just
this is team size is an interesting factor here. Ubisoft Montpellier, I don't know how vast their team is, because they've obviously now just wrapped up development on Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown. They have openly said that they've putting those developers onto Beyond Good and Evil 2 now. That suggests to me that production is ramping up since that smaller team has now been put onto there, which actually again suggests that Beyond Good and Evil 2 has been in the pre-production early phase for a lot longer than we think. So that's where I think, versus something like Skull and Bones, which was a multi-team effort across various Ubisoft studios, rebooted at least once during development, probably more if those rumours are to be believed. I can't even fathom the money invested in something like that. Just absolutely insane. And you look at what xDefiant tried to do, trying to weigh into an exceptionally competitive space. Now let's compare that. The direct comparison, I think, fairly, is the finals. A free-to-play first-person shooter, supported by a battle pass, and yet, I think, where xDefiant, and to a slightly lesser extent Concord, had a certain blandness to it, the finals has an aesthetic and a central mechanic in its destruction, and a feel that separated it from the rest. It evoked Bad Company in a way that was nostalgic without being in service to it. But it also tried to do something different. You could very easily show someone a clip of the finals and they would go, wow, I've not seen that before. You could show xDefiant and they would go, first of all, why does the Snowdrop engine look this ugly? Because this is the same engine that powers The Division, one of the best looking games ever made. How much they've had to scale that thing back to get it running at a lock 60. Just bonkers. Especially on next-gen only consoles. They're not even having to scale it across gens either, which is, again, just shows it was really poorly optimized. But also, just when you look at it, it's just so unremarkable. Like you said, I don't think people are going to know what it is.
The finals, this maybe just coincidentally, the finals came out when Battlefield was at an all-time low.
Right.
xDefiant came out. To be fair, it was probably quite a good release window. But now that Black Ops has come out and it's like the best Call of Duty for years, it's just got no chance. Because Call of Duty looks, Black Ops isn't a crazy looking game, but it looks so much better than xDefiant.
Yeah,
it's unreal.
It's polished. It's polished and it's slick. And it still does things that are unique within that franchise, right? Because it's already at the top and they're still pushing further. Junior Newbie God mentioning Splitgate as a reference to the kind of a similar title to xDefiant, which I agree, because like the finals, Splitgate came at a time when Halo was in pretty dire straits. And between that and it had a unique mechanic, the portal mechanic, with a Halo-style shooter. Brilliant idea. And that's where Splitgate 2 has found its niche, and that's coming, and that looks really, really slick. Again, filling a gap where Halo, which currently is not occupying. Very, very smart. They've recognised a gap in that. Whereas again, whether this was the creative intent, green lighting from management, or sort of an inflated budget, or all of the above, xDefiant just didn't read the terrain. I don't think. I think they just tried to be COD, and that doesn't work.
Exactly. What you would want to do is identify the problems with COD, which there are problems. Mm-hmm. It's a sweaty game. For me the customization goes too far. I'd like it to be more grounded and more realistic. If you make like a military sim version of COD with the same kind of arcadey
movement,
time to kill and movement and feel to it, I think you could really succeed. But they just basically aped Call of Duty completely. And so why wouldn't you just play Call of Duty? Because it looks better and is more polished.
And plays better. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So it's tough, I think, to sort of say it's not. I don't want to sort of say, oh, this isn't a surprise, because it seemed like one thing I will say to Ubisoft's defense is that they have a great track record of supporting their games post-launch. That when they launch, seemed to be not doing well, and then have incredible turnaround stories. There are several titles. For Honor is the big one that I can point to, as well as Rainbow Six Siege. Let's not forget how average Rainbow Six Siege was in terms of player count and critical response when it first dropped. And years later, with For Honor, Rainbow Six Siege still being supported to this day.
Just think, if Ubisoft didn't have For Honor and Rainbow Six Siege, they'd be completely screwed. I don't know where their money would be coming from, because they haven't had a decent. It feels like they haven't had a decent game launch for ages, and I imagine they're still getting relatively good microtransactions from.
Yeah,
from
probably the last one would have been Assassin's Creed Valhalla. And that was a while ago.
That was good.
And that was good. And actually, I think in terms of single-player titles, Mirage was quite well received because it was smaller, it was budget, it was evoking Assassin's Creed 2. But then that's only Assassin's Creed they're relying on there. That's a lot to put into one basket.
They went through that period where they did Assassin's Creed Mirage and they did the Prince of Persia game, and everyone started to think, oh, Ubisoft are turning a corner here. They're moving away from the kind of Ubisoft by numbers.
Yeah, and Lost Crown. Yeah, Lost Crown was supported well as well. Actually, again, in fairness, they had before they moved the team onto Beyond Good and Evil, they had several DLC, both free and premium, after launch for a single player game. So
I think the problem is that those, by their nature, they're less risky games. They're smaller games that cost less money. So when they succeed, they don't generate the same sort of fanfare as like Assassin's Creed Valhalla or big or xDefiant. They don't have the kind of. I feel like Ubisoft make a game like Skull and Bones, and they put huge marketing spend behind it, because I saw loads of ads for Skull and Bones, and yet it was always destined to fail. But they feel that they have to do that to get their money, to have any chance of getting their money back on it. But it's like sunk cost fallacy.
Yeah.
I don't know why they do it. So although they've had these successes with the smaller titles, their big risky plays have all failed pretty horrifically. I don't know why they don't do a Rainbow Six. Why didn't they, instead of xDefiant, just make a Rainbow Six?
Which would have had greater brand recognition as well. And if you kind of stripped it back to the sort of the Vegas style, slightly more arcade feel, that would allow them to sneak a toe into that market share, maybe.
Well, and that's no one other than Rainbow Six Siege is in that space at the moment, and it's not the same. It's not like the old Rainbow Sixes in terms of multiplayer. So I don't know. It's really, really worrying times, because I don't think Assassin's Creed is going to land well, and I don't know where Ubisoft go from there, other than getting bought out by someone.
Which I hope isn't Tencent. Junior Newbie mentioning how the finals feels pretty distinct compared to the mechanics and variation in themes and genres across FPSs. Yeah, it certainly is, and something that's certainly kept us hooked. Season 5, with the announcement of that coming soon, the developer said, we're looking ahead to 2025, with a year ahead, which was a really great show. I've been expressing offline some concerns that, is it going to just peter out and we're not going to see the game survive? But those numbers, it's shown growth, hasn't it? Good player retention in the last season. You couple that with, decent positions and numbers on console. Still, I always judge these games by like how quickly can I get into a match, like how fast can I get into a well-balanced game, and it's always under a minute to get into a game of the finals. Still.
And I don't think we've ever had server problems. We've never not been able to play the finals, which is pretty good.
I can't think of a round of the finals where I've had anything look resembling lag or latency.
No disconnects.
When have we, other than when we played the beta and it was a beta, when did we have like issues with the party system or? It's just flawless as an experience, and very, very explicit with the devs have openly acknowledged that there's work to be done on balance, which is great. They've said in Season 5 some major changes are coming to the meta from day one. but they haven't been specific yet. We haven't got the patch notes, but that is coming. So yeah, it's as much as obviously really disappointing for those developers and seeing how xDefiant's panned out. There is hope in the free-to-play space, and the Finals and Embark Studios are continuing to carve out a clearly profitable enough corner of a very crowded space in order for that thing to maintain its viability. So
yeah, and as much as it's, like you say, really disappointing for the teams involved, it is good for something like the Finals. Completely different sort of shooters, but there's all the people that were playing xDefiant that are going to be moving on to another title.
Yeah.
And the Finals, they started pushing their marketing a lot more because I think they're happy with the player retention that they have now, which seems to be really strong. So hopefully it will capture some of these people that are looking for a new FPS to play.
And maintain that consistency as we go into another year of updates from them. I mean, they're celebrating their 1-year anniversary this month too, because it came out, Shadow dropped at the Game Awards. So as sad as it is for that title, but very exciting to wrap up on some good news, I think is a very system link way to finish our show tonight. Thanks everyone so much for tuning in to our latest episode of System Link. We're back here every Wednesday at 9 o'clock or 9:15, depending on when the hell we can wrangle our children and get them to bed. We'll obviously keep you up to date on our timings and what the plan is on our socials. You can find us on Threads, Discord, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and Spotify, all at Burly Bird Media. Mike, where can the internet find you?
The xboxguide.com, Xbox Guide on Threads, and Xbox Guide on YouTube.
Lovely. Well, thanks again for everyone tuning in. Really appreciate Junior Newbie God. Shout out to you tonight for keeping chat so lively.
Yeah,
it's been really nice getting that back and forth with you. Thanks again, folks, for tuning in. We will see you this Saturday for a Burly Bird Live. Mike and I'll be playing some games, just hanging out, chilling out. You never know, might get a little appearance from Stephen Murray, my legendary co-host of Dulcet Tones, voice of the Knockout City DJ, might be sneaking back into chat as he did last Saturday. If you want to see some of that, please also, shout out again to not only a new article on Xbox Guide recently reviewing Game Pass for November, but also that 3-minute montage of our previous Burly Bird Live called Nigel Knife. I'm going to say nothing more. Please just go and check it out on the Xbox Guide YouTube channel. It's fantastic. We're going to be getting back to some more regular updates on Burly Bird Media as well. Some really exciting things brewing with our arcade space. There's going to be a lot of advertising being pushed around that as we go into 2025, as well as a roadmap as well. We'll be kind of revealing our next phase of what we're planning to do with this endeavor. So please look forward to that. Thank you again, Mike, as always, for being my ever jolly co-host. And we will see you all next time.
See ya.